Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Communities across the United States have come together to protect themselves from raids by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, commonly known as ICE. ICE planned massive raids in 10 major cities across the country, sparking a wave of solidarity as communities pulled together to offer safe spaces. The raids have been said to target newly settled migrant families, but advocacy groups and activists have been vigilant. They have warned migrants not to open their doors to ICE if they don't have the right warrant and suggested that all interactions with ICE agents be recorded. And ahead of the raids, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, took the decision to permanently ban ICE from accessing police databases. Mayor Lightfoot added that police in the city would not cooperate with ICE to detain residents. Protests took place across the U.S. in outrage against the government plans. Marchers in Chicago demanded that the White House close the camps, referring to detention facilities where migrants are held in appalling conditions. They also called for ICE to be abolished. And families demonstrated outside a migrant detention center in Florida last night, where nearly 25% of the population identify as having Latino heritage and face a greater risk from racist U.S. policies.
I mean, it's a mixture of horror, fear, disgust, anger. You have such a large Latino community in Miami, and we are directly affected by what is going on in these camps right now. It's right outside our front doors, and it's happening across the nation. We have ICE that is coordinating to honestly separate families and ruin the futures of these families, of these children.
Moving on, former South African President Jacob Zuma will be appearing before a commission to answer alleged state capture charges on Monday. It's been almost a year since the Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture corruption began in South Africa. The commission is probing allegations that the government, then led by Zuma, was worked with private businesses to their own benefit. Zuma denies the charges and is expected to give evidence that he did not commit the crimes leveled against him. South Africa's Rivonia trial, which saw Nelson Mandela and other anti-apartheid activists jailed, was a key moment in the country's struggle for freedom. Mandela and his co-accused face the death penalty for acts of sabotage against the state. July marks the 56th year since the trial. More in this report by our correspondent from Pretoria, Matuba Marlachi.
There are many people who feel that the reaction of the government to our stay at home, ordering a general mobilization, arming the white community, arresting 10,000s of Africans, the show of force throughout the country, notwithstanding our clear declaration that this campaign is being run on peaceful and non-violent lines.
Nelson Mandela was probably the most famous prisoner in the world, and that's thanks to the Rivonia trial. Mandela and 11 of his comrades were facing the death penalty for sabotaging the minority white supremacist government of the day. In 1960, that's 3 years before the Rivonia trial, the apartheid government had already shot and killed 69 unarmed black protesters. That image remained in the minds of those on trial, and they were all convinced they'd die. And before judgment was handed down, Nelson Mandela gave a speech in mitigation of sentence, but bravely told the court he was prepared to die.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
The presiding judge instead gave the men life sentences, and they would all be sent to Robben Island. It was now 1964 when the fight against the unjust apartheid laws took a turn for the worst. The white minority rule would thrive for another 3 decades. Matuba Mahlachi, Telesur, Pretoria.
Puerto Rico has erupted in anger following revelations regarding Governor Ricardo Rosello's conduct in office. Protesters have taken to the streets of the capital, San Juan, to demand Rosello's resignation after a report by the Investigative Journalist Center revealed the governor manipulated social media to attack his political opposition, employing racist and misogynistic language with his advisor while carrying out the scheme. For more on events in Puerto Rico, we're joined live by Rafael Bernabe. He's a spokesperson for the Citizens Victory Movement, the political party that organized the demonstrations. Thank you so much for your time, Rafael. I'm sure you've been very busy with everything that's been going on.
Yes, a little bit, but thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. These protests against Governor Ricardo Rosello have been taking place since last night, but allegations of corruption aren't new. What has changed?
Well, there are two things are new. One of them is that last Tuesday, the FBI arrested several former members of Rosello's cabinet, in particular the former Secretary of Education, and accused her formally of acts of corruption. This is a person that the labor movement and many educators in Puerto Rico had struggled against for a long time, but the accusations have confirmed what people have been saying over many years. The second thing is that it was revealed that the governor over many months had this so-called private chat, an internet private chat with all of his cabinet members and collaborators and so on, and his consultants. And this document is devastating. It's full of racist, sexist comments, jokes about people who died during the Hurricane Maria, jokes about women, jokes about working people. There are elements of conspiracy to make sure that the students are able to frame the students and accuse them of violent acts and so on. So there are many things that came out in this chat. It's about a 100-page document full of really terrible stuff. And that has really brought out the anger of people. There's no word to describe it but anger. And people are really out on the street saying we don't want to be ruled. We don't want to be governed by somebody who has these type of ideas in their head. So they are demanding the resignation of the governor.
Now, if Rosello refuses to stand down, what are the options for those demanding his exit from Puerto Rican politics?
Well, the Constitution of Puerto Rico provides for the impeachment of a governor. The way this can be done is that the House of Representatives has to carry out an investigation. If the House of Representatives finds that there are reasons for impeachment, then it makes an accusation, which the Senate has to then process. The Senate has to carry out what is basically a trial and to determine if the governor should be separated from his post. Our movement, the movement of Victoria Ciudadana, which has one legislator, we have presented a petition to start that impeachment process. Fortunately, the Puerto Rico Independence Party and the Popular Democratic Party, which are the two other opposition parties, have joined this petition. So we hope that at least some of the legislators of Rosello's own party will come over and sign the document so we can start that impeachment process. And needless to say, while that legal or legislative process is pursued, people have to stay in the street. People have to stay in the street to protest and demand the resignation of Governor Rosello.
Rafael, lastly, do these demonstrations show Puerto Rico is crying out for an end to neoliberalism? And what does a post-Rosello Puerto Rico look like? Rafael, are you hearing me?
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't hear the last part of the question.
Yeah, my last question was what does Puerto Rico look like after Rosello if he leaves office?
Well, yes, definitely. Governor Rosello has been associated from the start with neoliberal policies. He has followed a policy of trying to privatize the electrical system, trying to privatize the education system. The education secretary that is now under indictment for corruption was very much in the vanguard of trying to impose the privatization of the school system in Puerto Rico. So yes, the protest against Rosello also has a dimension, which is the protest against his neoliberal policies. Once Rosello is removed, needless to say, the new governor is going to be a governor of the same party as Rosello. So he will probably have the same neoliberal program that he has. And that only means that we are going to have to continue the struggle against whoever comes after Rosello. But there's no question that removing Rosello will be a very big step forward and will strengthen us in that struggle against whoever is his successor.
We thank you so much for your time for Telesur English.
Yeah, thank you.
We have been speaking with Rafael Bernabe from Puerto Rico. After the break, we look into the UN Security Council's assessment of the peace process in Colombia. Don't go away.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth.
The report has been strongly condemned by the Venezuelan government for being partisan and ignoring many key aspects to the situation in Venezuela, including the effect of U.S. sanctions on the country and the Bolivarian government's many social programs. President Nicolás Maduro said it was based on false statements, distortions, and the manipulation of data. The Venezuelan Minister of Communication, Jorge Rodriguez, has provided new evidence of opposition criminality in the failed coup d'etat that took place on April 30th. Rodriguez points to the theft of arms as a subject of the government's subsequent investigation and indicates how opposition leader Juan Guaidó is directly involved. Two of Guaidó's security guard have since been arrested.
Hace unos pocos días,
just a few days ago, we held a news conference to show the people of Venezuela and the world the brutal operation planned, including the assassination of the president, Nicolás Maduro. The first combatant, Celia Flores, the president of the National Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, and of 95% of the generals loyal to the Constitution and the Republic. That day, Mr. Juan Guaidó held a pantomime on a motorway in Caracas to try and deflect attention away from the grave events taking place. During this pantomime, we found that one of Juan Guaidó's security guards carried a weapon of war that is very similar to those stolen April 30th from the National Guard.
No puede ser.
It can't be the case that while we are engaged in permanent dialogue hoping to sustain a peaceful process of coexistence in Venezuela, it turns out that Juan Guaidó's close circle is in possession of arms that belong to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. The arms are for protecting the people, not attacking them.
Speaking at the United Nations on Friday, Venezuela's ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, said that a meeting held by the Organization of American States on Venezuela, headed by Secretary General Luis Almagro, only seeks to sabotage the ongoing dialogue process carried out in Barbados between the government and the opposition.
But the whole thing was a charade, it was a farce, because the only purpose of that press conference is to undermine, to preclude, to prevent, to sabotage the dialogue process that is ongoing right now in Barbados. There is a dialogue process that began in Norway, as you know, about 2 months ago, and this very same week, last Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, the parties met in Barbados, different political factions, and they are talking there, and they decided to carry on with this process. It's a peaceful dialogue in order to arrive at one governance agreement and a mutual understanding on how can we, within the Constitution, arrive at a solution, peaceful solution, a constitutional and political solution.
The delegation sent by the United Nations Security Council to investigate the peace process in Colombia visited a reincorporation center for former FARC combatants in the Cauca department on a Saturday. Peace agreements between the then Colombian government of Juan Manuel Santos and the FARC were signed in 2016 after negotiations in Norway and Cuba. However, the current president, Iván Duque, has sought to undermine the peace deal with up to 31% of the agreement yet to be implemented. At least 140 former FARC combatants have been murdered since the accords were signed. The Security Council is set to deliver its report later in July. And earlier, during the Security Council's visit to Colombia, President Iván Duque said he will ask them to accompany the peace process for one more year.
President Iván Duque met with delegates of the UN Security Council, where he expressed his commitment for the peace process.
Today I delivered a letter to the President of the UN Security, reaffirming that we want the mission to be here for one more year, because we consider that their work is vital to the process of reincorporation.
During the statement, the UN Security Council delegate expressed grave concern about the assassination of social leaders and former combatants.
We will meet with the communities and reincorporation centers. This will give the Security Council an opportunity to see how the components of the peace accord are being applied and what are the questions and concerns of those that live there.
The Security Council also met with members of different political parties, among them the FARC. After the meeting, the Congressman Marcos Calarca said President Duque's alleged commitment to the peace accords was a lie.
The murders continue. Now there are 2 every day, and there are no results from the investigations, which is important. But what is even more critical is avoiding murders. The government is saying there are results in 60% of cases, but that is a lie.
At the end of the meeting, Senator Roy Barreras regretted that members of the Centro Democrático failed to attend the meeting. He also called for a true commitment to peace with social guarantees.
There is a clear hostility against peace defenders and also systematic persecution that needs to end, because hate speeches precede physical violence. A meeting that ends with a statement from members of the Social Security Council supporting peace in Colombia is a success from Colombia, but also for the Security Council that has been accompanying the process.
The Security Council held a private meeting with delegates from civil society, and before leaving, they are expected to listen to the communities that have been most affected by the conflict in Colombia.
Days after equal marriage was legalized in Ecuador, a mural in the north of the capital city, Quito, was defaced by conservative groups. The mural demonstrated 3 couples kissing, 1 heterosexual, 1 lesbian, and 1 gay, each one painted with the colors of the LGBTQ plus flag. The reactionary vandals damaged the mural by drawing crosses over the homosexual couples featured. Days later, the mural was completely covered in white paint.
What happened here in Bella Vista was an attack on our community and the love we have for each other. I think we all need to join together in protest, because they can erase the mural, but they'll never erase us from society. We are here, we need to keep visibilizing our existence.
Coming up after the break, the former South African president, Jacob Zuma, is set to answer to allegations of corruption. Stay with us.
Who's moving the chessmen? What interests motivate the actors behind each event?
Al-Bashir was toppled in a coup following weeks of mass protests. More protesters are reported to have been wounded and hospitalized after the incident. A delegation of Libyan legislators from the governments in Tripoli and Tobruk have met in Egypt to discuss how to end the country's crisis. The first round of talks are set to continue until Monday with the objective of stabilizing the situation in the North African country. Our correspondent Nayara Tardo has the details.
Since early on Saturday morning, talks have been taking place between Libyan MPs as they try to reach an agreement on stability in the country. Almost 80 MPs have been meeting behind closed doors. The spokesperson for the Libyan parliament told the press that the objective of the meeting was to unify the political visions in Libya to find a definitive solution to the conflict. According to the latest report by the World Health Organization in Tripoli, the conflict has claimed the lives of 1,050 people and more than 5,000 have been injured. The Libyan spokesperson also said that this meeting is taking place here in Egypt because it is the country that is representing the African Union this year. Let's recall that in 2019, Egypt took charge of the presidency of the regional body. These meetings will come to an end on Monday with a final declaration delivered by Libyan representatives on the results of these meetings. The MPs have confirmed that this is the first step in a series of meetings and trying to reach a definitive agreement for peace.
We thank Nayara Tardo for that report. Protesters in Arab Jerusalem are rallying against the forced eviction of a Palestinian family. Security forces removed the family on Wednesday as Israel seeks to facilitate more Jewish settlers in Palestinian neighborhoods. Forced evictions are often a rallying point for those calling an end to Israeli occupation of Palestine.
We will stay here. We will not give up. We will keep going our life, but we will not just stop now in this step and just to say we are surrendered.
Anti-government demonstrators returned to the streets of Paris as France celebrates Bastille Day amid massive dissatisfaction in the country. Heavily armed police repressed the protests on the Champs-Élysées, using tear gas to forcibly remove the demonstrators. This is the 35th weekend of Yellow Vest protesters calling for drastic change in French governance, including an end to the neoliberalism President Emmanuel Macron represents. 175 people have been arrested in connection with the demonstration. President Macron had been participating in the traditional Bastille Day military parade. The day marks the storming of the Bastille, popularly considered a turning point in the French Revolution. And still in France, demonstrators gathered to protest against the visit of Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno. Moreno is in Paris on an official visit to the country. He was welcomed by protesters accusing him of being a traitor and proclaiming the innocence of imprisoned former Vice President Jorge Glass. The protesters also expressed their support for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who was forcibly removed from the Ecuadorian embassy in London earlier this year. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the new source from South America and the Caribbean.